Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writing for Roleplay, a tabletop RPG podcast. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Kayla.
And today we are going to be talking about not crafting the narrative of the wider world, but specifically crafting the narrative of your character. Now, I don't play a whole lot as a PC. I'm kind of a forever GM. I'm usually sort of running the game. But there's been a few times when I have been able to sit in the player seat. But I think, Kayla, because you have a lot more experience being a player at the table, I think this is an episode where you're going to have a lot more to say about this subject than I will.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about character creation. It's a passion of mine. As not really a forever character, I have GM'd a couple of times, but I feel a lot more comfortable playing, that's for sure. I am curious, I guess, about character. If you were given an opportunity to play in a longer form campaign, I am curious about what you would be interested in exploring, but perhaps we can talk about that at the end of the episode after we go through my TED Talk here.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I think the big thing, I don't have a whole lot of times where I am a PC, but I think the big thing I always think about is, all right, what can I do now that I can take up the spotlight? Because as a GM, a lot of times, I can create a lot of different interesting characters through NPCs and villains and all that. But narratively, I have to stay away from the spotlight and the big plot changing decisions unless I am playing the big villain who is doing something to change the plot. So the closest I come to really creating a character that can hold the spotlight and make a lot of changes is the big villain. But the main character, even if I have an NPC that is with the main characters and is ostensibly a part of the group, I still have to keep that character from making the big plot changing decisions. So that's what I think of when I think of crafting a character is oh, what would be something that would be really cool for me to do? But that's my personal perspective. Kayla, run us through some of the things you think about and what other people should think about when creating a character.
It is actually kind of funny that you talk about how with your NPCs and your quote-unquote DM PCs, which we'll talk about a little bit more at the end, that you try and step back, because I do think sometimes we personally in our game, the other players, we tend to lead very democratic parties, and we will ask the NPCs that we consider to be major players within the party. We will ask some of them, well, what do you think we should do? And you have to sit there I can't tell them what to do because that's not the point of being the DM. But also they've forgotten that this is not a full-blown PC character that they're talking to. This is an NPC that the party sort of makes into a little bit more of a DM PC. I think that's kind of how some DM PCs might come about, is that the party kind of treats them a little bit more like how we're treating all of the other PCs at the table. But yeah, you're correct. PCs are the main characters. It's all about main character energy. And that can be a little difficult to navigate, I think, in a collaborative-based storytelling game, because everybody in the group is the main character with a capital M and C. And they are making choices as if they are the main character. And typically in a lot of our media, there is a singular protagonist, not necessarily multiple protagonists. There are, but it's less common. And this is definitely a medium where you have multiple protagonists. One of the most famous notorious pieces of friction in game groups can be infighting, basically, between the players over jockeying for position. Because when you build a main character, you do have to think about the fact that you are driving the story. And when you have, say, 4 main characters driving the story, getting into conflict of one character wants to go one direction and another character wants to go another direction, and you have conflicting goals, conflicting personalities that can be really sticky.
That's a crux of something to think about, though, is that you are making a main character, but you are not making the main character. Like, unless you are playing a game where it is you and the GM. Usually with role-playing games, there is a group of people around the table. And so you're making someone who can grab the spotlight, who can make plot-relevant decisions, but you also have to make sure that you're sharing the spotlight with everyone else.
100%.
And that's what you kind of have to think about while crafting your characters, that you aren't the only person at this table.
Yes, and absolutely, I want to dig into that a little bit more. But before we dig into building the overall personality of your character, I want to talk about like what comes first, the character or the mechanics. And I think this is an interesting sort of divide that we see in the tabletop community. You know, there's all sorts of different types of players, but I think there's kind of two major camps in TARPs. That is, for everybody who's like, what's a TARP? Remember we made an acronym back in episode 1 and we haven't used it since? TARP, of course, being Tabletop Action Roleplay, which is our easier way of saying TTRPG, because that's a tongue twister that I will eventually stumble over.
I'm going to stick with TTRPG, but I appreciate you keeping TARPs alive.
Listen, I will, every now and then, I'm just going to throw out a TARP to keep you on your toes.
Okay.
So I think there's sort of two major camps, and that's going to be people who prefer combat and people who prefer role playing. And that's not to say that you can't really be in both camps, but I do think that if you vastly prefer one to the other, it really starts to influence how you build your character. So I just kind of want to talk about those different approaches. So if you maybe prefer combat, then you're going to be really mechanics centered. I think you're going to think about what is going to be a cool character to play in combat, what is going to be very effective, very durable, what's going to have a high damage output, you know, and you'll be thinking about your character mechanic first, because you're going to be thinking, how can I get the most out of this class, species, background, etc. that I am building out of this character. And you'll get people, I think, that are a little bit more into min-maxing on that side. That being said, I do really enjoy combat, and I definitely am looking at my mechanics and building a lot of my mechanics around combat. When I've played wizards in the past, I tend to pick up a lot more combat skills rather than utility-based ones, even though I was the utility caster. There was an entire campaign, my wizard never learned like identify. You know, I was just like, that's not important. What's important is making sure that we stay alive. And how do we stay alive? Fireball. You know, and that's just all, you know, you pick the mechanics based off of what sounds interesting to you and what you want to play. That's a perfectly valid way to build your character. So I think if you start with mechanics, then you need to think about how these mechanics would influence the character. So if you are building a high charisma character, then obviously you might be building a character that is very outgoing, that is the face character, and they talk a lot. However, you know, you don't have to. You can play a high charisma character who is maybe generally pretty awkward. I think you can pull that off still. I'm currently, for example, I'm playing a paladin who is kind of socially awkward. And that charisma plays into the force of personality and a lot of on the intimidation checks more than like persuasion checks or things like that. These skills, the charisma, strength, they're very broad, really, in the interpretations that you can take it with. You know, so if you're playing a min-max character, and again, I don't necessarily always play min-max characters as much as I enjoy combat and mechanics. I don't like being bad at things. So I do tend to balance my characters a little bit across the board in terms of their skills, for better or worse. And that's fine. The big thing with character creation that we'll keep coming back to is what is going to be fun for you and what is going to be fulfilling for you. And ideally, that's both. Things are fun because they're fulfilling, and they're fulfilling because they're fun.
And we mentioned this in our world building episode, that like how you interact with the world is very much influenced by the mechanics of the game that you're in. Mm-hmm. And the mechanics of character creation are going to influence the character that you create. Whether it's Dungeons and Dragons and their class system, like, you can make any kind of wizard under the sun, but once you choose the wizard class, your character is going to fit within some notion of, a wizard, especially due to the abilities that you are able to unlock as you go further. Same with the barbarian, fighter, all the different classes. Like, by choosing a class, your character is going to be influenced by that class. Now, you can make a bard with low charisma, nothing stopping you, but you are going to be mechanically hindered, and the purposes of how this class was designed is going to be hindered in turn.
Absolutely.
And there are other RPGs that don't even use classes, like there's Powered by the Apocalypse games that use playbooks that give an even firmer idea of how your character fits in the world through utilizing the narrative archetypes. Like Monster of the Week, the playbooks are very much like, are you an X-Files kind of agent, or are you a Templar sworn to hunt monsters, or are you just some guy who keeps getting caught by the monster? And then there are some RPGs that have no classes, and your character is either just the numbers you put into it, or with some of the more freewheeling narrative-based games, just specific attributes that you pick up, like narrative tags that you add to your character. City of Mist is very much like that, where your character doesn't have numbers, but they have narrative tags that they can pull on during scenes. Like, casting Fireball in D&D is a class feature when you put a few levels into Wizard or Sorcerer, but casting Fireball in City of Mist is the narrative tag Fireball that you add to one of your themes. So,
yeah,
the mechanics of your character is how your character interacts with the world, and so it is impossible to fully separate the character you want to be from the mechanics that you're going to build that character from.
Yes, I've seen people try. I have played with people, usually in one-shots, where their highest score is not, and this was for D&D, their highest score was not for the one that is most important to their class. And I was sitting there like, why is your dex higher than your strength if you're a strength-based character or whatever? Or it was like your wisdom is higher, but you're like a fighter character. You should have poured everything into dex or strength, I mean, people are allowed to do what they want to do. Full stop. That was the decision she wanted to make. That was fine. We're not here to be prescriptive necessarily, but I will say in a long form campaign, you really do want to make your character kind of the best version that they can be within that class, like the most effective version. If you're playing a fighter, you gotta dump everything you have into your strength or your dex, whatever it's gonna be. If you're playing a wizard, you gotta dump into your intelligence. And the reason why you want to lean into your class and into your place in that party is because that is how you are effective. And that is how you get those main character moments, is by being able to step into the spotlight and do what you're supposed to do, quote unquote, really well. Like, that is where you're going to feel like I am a main character, because I am the wizard that stepped in and fireballed the shit out of all of these goblins. And it was like a huge, cool moment. Or I am the rogue that was able to pickpocket this important politician at a gala and get us the thing that we needed to get. So leaning into what your character is doing, and maybe not fully min-maxing, but building your character around being a really effective version of their class, is going to help you feel like a main character. And when you feel like a main character, I think it's a lot easier to recognize when to step back and let other characters feel like the main character, because you don't want to be a ham all of the time and hogging all of these big moments and stepping on other people's moments. And I think, generally, I like to think the best of people. And I think that when we're all sitting at the table, generally we're all friends, or we're friendly, or we're all just trying to have fun playing a game. So I don't necessarily think, and, sure, there's people who they don't give a shit about the other players at the table. Like, they just want to be like really cool, etc. And they don't care if they're kill stealing, quote unquote, or hogging all of the treasure, or making everybody else feel bad. Yes, there are selfish people in the world, but I think generally we all just kind of want to have fun, and we all want to feel like important main characters in this game.
And it's interesting to think about that because there's a way of thinking of like, I have this character in mind, and so I'm going to work the mechanics so that way, like, I want a character that's good at killing people. I need to pay attention to the mechanics for killing people. But in a group setting, you should also think about your character in terms of the group. And I've worked with players who start out with a really strong character concept and then build it from there. And I've worked with players who wait for everyone else to come up with their character concepts and then create their character to fill the slot.
And that's the thinking about your character in terms of party balance is a really good way to get those main character moments, because if there's a hole in the party and you step up to fill that hole, you're going to be very, very useful. Now, this is not saying, if there's no healer, well, guess what? You have to play the healer. You don't have to play the healer. Everybody can agree. Nobody wants to play the healer. That is a risk that we are willing to take with our characters. You shouldn't force somebody to play support class if they don't want to play support class. But if there is a support class needed and you're like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. You are going to have a lot to do, and you're going to really carry that party in many ways because they can't do what you can do. Nobody else in the party can do what you can do. And it makes you very effective and important in really clutch moments sometimes. Whereas if you have two wizards who are maybe not the same subclass, but fairly similar, and they're both casting Fireball, they might not feel as unique, and it could hamper sort of how they are approaching their character long-term subconsciously. Like maybe one of them ends up deciding to multi-class because they're like, well, I'm not really very unique in this situation. And that might be something that you do or you don't recognize consciously. And everything kind of depends on the game that you're playing, I think. But I think that is something that can kind of come up is I think people unintentionally will make more selfish decisions when they feel like they are not able to be really effective or shine or be main characters. They're going to start grabbing more and more at what they think is going to make them a main character. So I think one of the ways to sort of prevent that in the very beginning is by creating like a more balanced party, or by thinking long term kind of about what you want your character to be able to do, or thinking, this is the setting. The settings are so important because here's the thing. If you want to play a ranger, but this is an urban setting, it's going to be really hard for you to really do what rangers are very good at. And that's going to be frustrating. And you might think, no, it's not. I've got it. It's fine. It's cool. I'll be okay. You say that session 0, get to session 12, and you still haven't used most of your class features. It's going to start eating at you a little, I think. So you do want to think about what kind of setting you're playing in. And conversely, some settings, I love wizards. Some settings are not very wizard friendly. Wizards need a lot of resources. They need a lot of money. They need a lot of paper. If you are playing in a lower magic setting, or in a setting where there's not a lot of shops, things are scarce, it's going to be harder to play a wizard. And, it's funny because some of the modules that we've played, it's been a lot of, Gary Gygax his ghost is all over this place, making it a smorgasbord for wizards because, he loved wizards. He played Morkainen. And this is set up for wizards, and there's so many spell books all over the place. And some modules are, I'm really glad I did not play a wizard because that would have sucked.
And we come back to like the importance of having a session 0, or at the very least starting out on the same page. Like if you want to create a good character that can thrive in the game that you're playing, like not only do you need to know the game's rules and the mechanics that you can utilize to create the best representation of that idea of your character in your head, but also, like you were saying, like I want to play a super magical wizard. Having that lowdown of like, okay, but they're going to have a hard time in this world because there's not going to be a whole lot of like resources for them is something very important to know before committing to playing a wizard.
Yeah, it's kind of like, we played a campaign. I finally played a bard. I played, it was a little bit of, because of sort of my personality and the way that I was role playing in our first campaign with the wizard, it was a little bit like, oh, Kayla should play a bard. Kayla should play a bard. Like, that'll be fun. Give her like deception, etc., whatever, you know. And I was like, yeah, like I should totally play a bard. I did play a bard for a full campaign. I played a bard, no multi-class. I was an effective bard. Will say I leaned all the way in. I understood what my job was and I went for it. But it was challenging for my own personal playstyle. And that was something that I just figured out organically. I wouldn't have known if I hadn't played it. That, playing a support class is more difficult for me, because not necessarily because I don't want to help my friends, but because of the way that I approach strategy. It was harder for me. I had to work harder in our combat and in our strategy than if I had been playing a non-support like DPS character. And I do not regret it. It was really interesting and very fun, but it was definitely like, and that's something that you're going to have to learn about yourself as you go. You know, we have another friend who played cleric and she loved it. Like, she was like, you know, I think everybody, speaking in D&D, and you know, this happens with whatever your regular RPG is, if there is any sort of class system in it, I think we all kind of end up gravitating towards one, maybe two, that really fit sort of our play style and personalities and what we like to do. And she's like, I think cleric is like my class, quote unquote, you know, like that's the one that I'm most effective at. I'm really good at the strategy. I'm good at being a support class cleric. And I was like, that's incredible for you. I think I would just get frustrated because that's just not the way that I approach problem solving in context of like these combats. And that's so important to your characters, thinking about, how have I approached combat in the past? How have I approached obstacles in the past? What are my problem solving skills? Because RPGs is a lot of problem solving, really.
Mm-hmm.
And different classes are going to have different abilities to problem solve. Some people are like, I just want to smack it. And that's fantastic. Sometimes that is how you beat a problem, is by just hitting it until it stops being a problem. Fantastic. Play a melee class. Some people are a little bit more analytical, maybe. You know, the wizard spell list can be very intimidating for some people, that like it's too many choices. They don't like having that many choices. And some people, they need all of the options. Yeah, and so one of the things that was frustrating for me going from playing a wizard for a full campaign into a bard for a full campaign was that I felt that bards were a lot more restricted than wizards. They had a narrower set of choices, in my opinion, and that was frustrating for me. Other people, they don't have that problem. They find wizards to be overwhelming or too complex, too complicated, unnecessary, etc. Bards, perfect. And that's, you know, it's all up to you and to your playstyle, personality, strategy, etc. So that's something really important to think about with the mechanics. And then once you have, you know, those mechanics, you can think out personality. Like, okay, so I'm playing a barbarian. They have low charisma, low wisdom, you know, what kind of personality is that going to beget, etc. If you start with a character concept and then go into mechanics, you have to, in my opinion, really lean into what mechanics are going to give me this character that I have thought of. Like, if you think of personality and backstory and all of that before you ever look at mechanics, when you are looking at the mechanics for this character, make sure you're cool with those mechanics. Because you might be building a character that is working with a mechanic set that you are unfamiliar with, or that you don't love a whole lot. And that's a little bit what happened to me with the bard, was I kind of approached character. I went with bard. I was like, oh, goblin bard would be like a funny thing to play. It was a little bit of a gag. So I was like, let me play this gag character for a full campaign.
Which usually, in my experience, when someone does a gag character, it eventually becomes serious. That's almost all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
That happens.
And I love that little goblin bard. I loved her. It was an interesting sort of exercise for me to realize, like, oh, okay, yeah, I thought of what I thought a goblin bard might be like, and then I built the goblin bard, if that makes sense. So I maybe I did start with, you know, species and class technically, but it was the concept of what a goblin bard would be that I started with, and then I dug into mechanics. You know, when you start with concept and then you go into mechanics, you might discover, oh, these mechanics are different from what I was thinking or what I am good at, etc. So that's just something to like kind of keep in mind. That's like that at the end of the day, you have to play the mechanics. So make sure that you are picking mechanics that you like. And if you don't like complicated mechanics, do not build a character with complicated mechanics. Even if you're interested in the concept of a wizard or a sorcerer, you're going to end up running into either you're going to learn those mechanics and you're going to love them, or you're going to get really frustrated. So I think that's just kind of in a role-playing game, I do really think that mechanics is kind of the place to start, because that's the game part of the role-playing game. And if you don't love mechanics, then you should pick a system that has less mechanics and is more RP focused.
And of course, there's the discussion of like mechanics inform RP and vice versa. But in this conversation about crafting your character, like you can start out with the who, the character concept, and then work on the what, which is the game mechanics, how they fit in the actual game. Or you can start out with the what, like, what class is this person, what race, whatever, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or what playbook they are in another game or something like that. And then use those mechanics to inform the who of your character concept. And then the character concept itself is informed by the setting that they're in, the where and when.
Yes.
So we've talked about the who, the what, the where, the when. But there's one last bit that is incredibly important to your character that I have seen many players just not think about for some reason, and that is the why.
Yeah.
Why are they here? Why are they doing what they're doing? And very crucially, why are they working with this group? Because I've seen a lot of players create lone warrior characters or characters who are fundamentally uninterested in the plot of the game. And my response to that is like, okay, I'm going to need you to make another character who's going to play along. Like, I don't know what you want from this.
Yeah, it is. That's a huge issue, I would say. And I think part of it is that in our media, there are a lot of lone wolf type characters.
Mm-hmm.
That we enjoy. Like, it is interesting to see a lone wolf moving through this world, and it makes sense to me that people would want to create that character, but it is a social game. And so I think one of the things with character creation, you do want to be, when you think about your motivations and you think about your character and your concept, I do think that it behooves you to start small, to stay loosey-goosey and open-minded, and let the adventure build your character. If you want to come in with 10 pages of backstory, that is your prerogative. That is not necessarily, necessary. I have a lot of fun sort of coming in with very bare bones and then building that character around the adventure that happens, because I don't know fully what's going to happen. And I have been in the position where I've come in with a very, very strong concept of my character, with ideas of what I want to do down the line, with a lot of information about their backstory, and it just never comes up. It just never comes up because the adventure doesn't really go there, or there's a left turn and that stuff is no longer relevant. So I think being a little light on some of that stuff can help you, and then you can sort of fill it in on those early sessions. And I've had characters there, their voice will change a little bit in the beginning, their personality will be a little gelatinous until we set into something, because I'm exploring who this character might be as they interact with different stimuli for the first time. You want to be loose, and part of that is being collaborative and not being a lone wolf. I would very strongly recommend against being a lone wolf if you are newer to role-playing or in a new group, because it's harder to get a loner character invested in this group adventure. That's not to say that you can't do it. You absolutely can. But I think it's easier if you do it with an established group that you've played with a lot, you're very familiar with, and you all kind of trust each other. It's a lot easier to make more controversial, if you will, characters when you're playing with people that you're very familiar with, because there's that level of trust with each other about the choices that you're making, that it's all going to work out.
And going back to backstory, I'll say this from like the GM's perspective. I've worked with players who had like, a paragraph of backstory. I've worked with players who had like full on pages in a Google Doc of backstory. Like they sat down, they put out like 2,000 words on their character. As a GM, if you give me three things, a motive, a hometown, and a person, that's all I need. What I mean by that is, like, first off, the motive is, all right, why is your character here? Why are they with these people? Why are they engaging in, whatever the game's point is, whether it's small town romance, whether it's epic, grand adventure, whether it's an RPG about managing a space station. Like, why are they here? That's what I need. A hometown, or literally just anything that like ties them to the world, but especially it's like my character is from here, or my character is from this mercenary company, or my character was part of like this sailing ship or something like that. And then a person, it's like, my dad was a noble and I grew up in luxury, or my rival was this guy and I'm still searching for him to this day, or I made a deal with this person and it went bad, so now I'm on the run from them. But having like just an NPC, even if they're never used in the campaign, as a GM, I see that as like, ooh, this would be very easy for me to put this person in the campaign, and then suddenly there's someone who has a personal attachment to this character that I can mess with. But like I said, even if you don't put that character in the campaign, that person can also influence your character's motivation. Like, like I said, like the backstory of I made a bad deal with a crime boss and now I'm on the run. That crime boss doesn't have to appear in the story for that story to still affect your character.
Yes, it could lead to that character making very particular choices about, oh, we can't stay in this town too long, or, we need to take this more dangerous, higher paying job because I really need the money to like pay back this debt, etc. And that can create fun intra-party conflict of some of the party members are maybe less willing to take like certain risks, or like it's just a good way to create some sort of like safe, fun intra-party conflict when your characters have mildly conflicting backstories. And I say like safe and mildly conflicting because, again, it's a social game. So if you've played with a group for a long period of time and you trust each other, it's easier to have your characters fight in kind of uglier, messier ways, as long as everybody at the table is aware that we are playing pretend and exploring just like what this kind of conflict looks like, and we're not actually mad at each other. This is purely the characters going at it. And that is all. It's incredibly interesting. It's very fun. We've done it. It is a lot easier to do with people that you've known for a long time and played with for a long time. And it does require briefing and debriefing. For example, in our personal home games, my character and our friend's character went at it quite a bit, and we're very much in conflict.
Now, when you say "went at it," do you mean in a violent way or in a...
There was never violence that broke out, but it was a lot of on the verge of violence, on the verge of like, I don't trust you as like the characters. I don't trust you. I don't trust that you're not going to make terrible decisions that endanger all of us. Or I don't trust that you're not going to turn on us and attack us yourself. There was a lot of that. And a lot of like, you made decisions that had consequences. And I was not cool with those decisions that you made. The characters going back and forth over power, essentially, in those early sessions and stuff. And that was a dynamic that happened between me and a person who have known each other since we were 13. Like, we have known each other for a very long time. We've played several long campaigns together. We've done different dynamics. And there was it was my roommate, so we would drive over to Kevin's place to play the game and then drive back to our place. And on the car ride home, it was a lot of like, I'm not like really mad at you or anything. Like, a lot of like conversation and debriefing and stuff. So if you're going to do that kind of conflict, you do sort of want to make sure that you are above the table being like, this is chill, right? We're okay with this. And if you guys aren't, you don't have to. Like, that doesn't have to be a feature in your character dynamics.
I think that hits like a big tip that goes across the board, which is like the better your communication, like outside the table or outside the game, the better your communication within the game. Like you can take more
Yes.
risks within a game with a group that you communicate well with.
So yeah, if you're gonna play a lone wolf character, that's something that you kind of want to do in session 0. Typically with people that you know pretty well, it's going to be easier. You say like, hey, I want to play a lone wolf character. You know, maybe they're with this party because they were hired by the party or something. And the attachment and the lone wolf attaching to the pack, I guess, is something that's going to happen in those early sessions. And again, that's something that's going to happen in those early sessions because you can't play a lone wolf forever. Or I guess if you want, you could play a lone wolf for a few sessions and that lone wolf leaves and then you roll up a new character partway through the campaign. That's something you can do too if you really want to. You can basically do whatever you want in an RPG. That's kind of the fun bit. As long as everybody's cool with it, you can play a lone wolf character. And maybe your intention with the DM is, hey, I want to play a lone wolf character that these guys hired, and he's not interested in hanging out with this party or being friends with this party or being with this party long term. He has his own motivations, and kill him. Kill him in a way that's really traumatic for the rest of the party. I want to go down in a blaze of glory. This is what this character will serve. And then I'll roll up another character to play for the rest of the campaign. You could do something like that. That's totally fine. I guess you could do that for the entire campaign if you wanted, where you kept playing mercenaries that the group kept hiring and then they would either die or leave and then you played a new one. If that's how you experiment with a bunch of different classes and a bunch of different characters, like that's fine. You could totally do that. That sounds like a fun idea.
Yeah, we loop back into like the best way to craft your characters to know the game that you're playing first.
Yeah.
And the expectations therein and the mechanics that you have available to you. And, you know, we talk a lot about like RPGs where everyone's a cooperative party, whether you're a party of adventurers in Dungeons and Dragons or a heist crew in a cyberpunk game or anything along those lines. But there are also RPGs that play more like political thrillers where the assumption is that the characters are actually working against each other in some ways. You know, and there are games who specifically have written in their character creation mechanics like, here's who you are within society. Here's some strengths that you have, but also here's some secrets that you have.
Yes.
And seeing the importance of character secrets in those games, it's very easy to transfer the importance of character secrets to other games that you play. Like your character can have an incredibly compelling secret in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, not a 100% chance that that secret will ever come out, in which case that's just, you know, some richness to your character that you yourself get to enjoy. But sometimes those secrets come out during the course of play, and you get this kind of interesting moment where the character themselves is like, I don't want this to be known. This is my horrible secret. And the player at the table is like, finally, I get to reveal this secret about my character.
That 10-page backstory I wrote a year ago that hasn't come up yet. And, you know, that's like when we say, like, you don't need to write a 10-page backstory. It's because typically if you write a 10-page backstory, like most people want to tell everybody what it is, and it just may never come up. The character could die, the group may not be able to meet up so much, so the campaign never finishes. It just never comes up naturally. And so that's what, like, if you build a character that has these secrets, or is a loner, or is difficult in any way, shape, or form, is hiding something, etc., they shouldn't for long. Like, that's my piece of advice for you, is get attached to the party quickly, reveal your secrets kind of quickly, because you may not have the chance to do a slow burn, either because your character dies or the group falls apart. So you can have these secretive loner characters or these big like backstory revelations 100%. It's going to be easier if you're okay with revealing that stuff early on. And if you're unsure of how to like realistically reveal that stuff early on, like, oh yeah, but I don't know, my character, like, we've only known each other for 2 weeks. It's not true to my character that they would reveal this. Talk to the DM about ways to sort of force your hand. Maybe you have some sort of nightmare that has you wake up screaming and wakes up everybody in the camp circle or whatever, and there's some sort of vision in the fire, you know, like work with your DM. Basically, communication again is key. That's a huge thing. Or you could even kind of talk to your other players and sort of, you know, for example, our characters are going to start this campaign being best friends because we want to explore a concept of, maybe betrayal. Because you're going to find out that I am a warlock of Asmodeus and you've been a cleric this entire time, but I've been keeping this a secret from you. I would like to maybe explore this. And this is good also with like intra-party romances, perhaps, of being like, hey, it makes a lot of sense that my character might have a crush on your character. Would you be okay with RPing a romance through like the game? Like, is that something you're comfortable with or you don't really want to? Let me know now because I'm not really going to pursue it, or we can pursue it and you can shoot my character down. That could be fun. Like those kinds of things. I don't think it's wrong to sort of talk about those sort of things ahead of time. If they're something you want to explore, it doesn't have to be fully and completely improv, absolutely in the moment all of the time. I think it's okay to talk to your DM and talk to your other players about, I'm kind of interested in something like that. Would you maybe, hey, can you have your character, corner my character at the bar to talk about that moment that happened after combat? Because like my character, they're not going to want to talk about it, but your character, it would make sense for your character to want to unearth it. Because it could be that the player is like, oh yes, of course. I wasn't even thinking about that, but you're absolutely right. Like I would probably go be like, hey, are you okay? Because there's so much going on in a game that things that make sense for your character, you may not think to do it unless another player asks you to kind of tee up that moment. And that's part of the whole sharing the main character energy and of the multiple protagonists thing, is teeing up moments for other characters or recognize when you're being set up to. And I think this is part of why a lot of theater kids or comedians are really into RPG, is because a lot of improv comedy, people that are really, really good at improv comedy, they set up the joke for other people rather than like going after the punchline themselves. That's a huge skill, is being able to set up the joke rather than just go for the punchline. And that's a huge thing in RP, in my opinion.
I think we're hitting on the number one tip for crafting your character in a tabletop RPG, is acknowledging that your character does not exist in a vacuum. Like there's a dozen different ways and angles you can take to creating a character. You can start with the concept and then work with the mechanics. You can start with the mechanics and then flesh out the concept. You can wait for everyone else to create their characters and then you create your character to fill a gap. You can find something interesting in the world and create a character around that. You can have a interesting motivation or secret in mind and then create a character from there. But at the end of the day, like, you need to acknowledge the game you're playing and the people that you're playing with while creating your character. And if you acknowledge that, if you pay attention to that, then your character will be all the richer for it, and so will your gameplay experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, it's just going to end up being frustrating for everybody. And I think there is a little bit of a DMs shouldn't tell players what to play, and everybody should be able to play whatever they want to play, etc., etc. But I think you can loop back around to just sort of not being on theme. If you have a themed party and you show up not going with the theme, everybody's going to be like, look at this guy. Like, and that's why I tend to, maybe 50% or so of the way through a module, I start asking Kevin, so, what do you think the next one's going to be? Because when we're about 50% of the way through a module, I've gotten a good taste of the character I've been playing, and then I start missing things that is not a part of that character that were maybe from other characters, or I have an idea, or I've watched other people at the table play these cool classes that I haven't played yet, and I'm like, oh, that kind of looks interesting. Like, maybe I'll do that next time. That makes me think about the other possibilities that are out there. What other kinds of characters could I be playing? And then I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to play. It's like when you're eating lunch and you're thinking about dinner already. So I'll start. So I'll start asking Kevin. I'm like, so what are you thinking about? Like the next one, what might that be? Because I want to start when I'm getting the itch of thinking about a new character. I want to know from the very beginning what kind of campaign we might be in. Because I personally just don't want to get too attached to a character idea that's not gonna fit for the campaign that we're playing in. When Kevin told us, yeah, the next one's gonna be Curse of Strahd, I was like, ooh, vampire campaign. Love vampires. That sounds like a great campaign to play a Dampier paladin, because paladins would be very effective in an undead situation. And when else am I going to play a Dampier except like in the Halloween episode campaign, like perfect, great, excellent, good, you know. So and that's the thing is playing super on theme can be a lot of fun because you fit into the world so well, and it does give you a greater chance to have more main character moments if you're on theme. But if you're incongruous, if you don't fit at all, it just kind of, sticking out like a sore thumb. It's a little bit like, what are you even doing in this movie?
And we mentioned this during the world building episode, but GMs can also reserve the right to be like, hey, this character concept that you have in mind just does not fit with the game we're about to play. Like, if we're playing Curse of Strahd and it's like a horror campaign, and once again it's like, well, I want to play a cat person cyborg, it's like that's just not going to fit. I'm sorry. That sounds really cool. Keep that in mind for later, but that's just not going to fit for the campaign that we're trying to run right now.
You can play to theme while still having some fun with it, but you can't break the rules unless you know those rules.
Exactly. As I said, there's so many different jumping off points that you can use to jump off to create your character concept, but acknowledging that those jumping off points are there and acknowledging that your character is not being made in a vacuum is the best place to start when creating your character. But audience, we're interested in hearing, when you start creating your character, where do you usually start out with? Do you start out with the character concept? Do you start out with the mechanics? Do you start out with a world building detail? Do you like to min-max rather than think about like how your character role plays within the world? What kinds of characters do you usually gravitate to playing? And if you have like a favorite character that you've played, we would love to hear about that in the comments or on our Discord channel. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content like extra episodes and access to our private Discord where you can share your character concept ideas with everyone else who enjoys this show. So definitely check it out. Writing for Roleplay is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knutson. It is edited mostly by Kevin because Kayla volunteered to do other stuff.
I had to look up how to make an LLC.
We post a new episode every Tuesday, so until then, see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.